Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Sold My Car, New Owner Tries to Make Me Pay Over $2,000 in Fees. So, when I was in college, I bought an old 1974 Mercury Comet with the intent of fixing it up because I loved older cars. However, due to being a broke college kid, I eventually realized that I bit off more than I could chew, and started looking to sell the car. Pretext: my apartment had one street where everybody could park if they didn't pay extra for a private parking space, and I couldn't afford to have a private spot, so this is where I parked. Since the street was a public street, they had a rule where you couldn't leave your car parked in the same spot for more than 72 hours, or else the car was technically abandoned, and they had the right to tow it. Now I had problems with this rule since I had gotten the car. Most of the time, this rule is pretty much ignored, as everyone parking here either lives in the apartment complex or they were parked there because it was the closet-free parking area to my university, and all the cars just blend in with each other. The problem with my car was that it stuck out like a sore thumb being from 1974 and, admittingly, looked like it couldn't even start. So I had gotten a decent amount of fines and tickets from them, but was always able to contest and win because I could prove I lived on the street, and I always made sure I moved it to the other side of the street every 2 to 3 days so they legally couldn't tow it. Safe to say, every time the cars on my street were checked, they kept an eye out for mine to give some BS reason as to why they could ticket or fine me. They really didn't like me. Fast forward to selling my car. It took a while to find somebody to sell the car to, but after a couple months I finally found a buyer. He was a little older than me, but not by much. I was only getting $1,500, which sucked because I paid closer to $2,500 for the car, but thought I got my money's worth of driving around and was just glad to get something for it. He told me he couldn't pay all at once, and wanted to know if we could do a payment plan for the car, which I agreed to because I just wanted the car gone. And so I wrote up a contract with everything detailing the sale in it, which he signed, I signed, and a witness, his friend who happened to come help him with the car, also signed. I got $500 in cash, and then a few days later, the car was gone, so that was the end of it, or so I thought. Fast forward a few weeks later and I got a letter about the car. The car had been towed and was still in my name, because I completely forgot to do a title transfer when I sold the car, and had how much I owed at the bottom for the storage in the tow yard. Almost $2,000. I checked the date it was towed, and it had been towed a couple days after I made the sale, because the buyer never took the car. What also confused me was that it had been weeks and the buyer never said anything to me asking about the car and where it was. So I messaged him and tried to call him letting him know what happened. He didn't get back to me until 6 days later, asking where it got towed to, and if the car was still there. I gave him the information and he called the company to ask how much the total cost for the car was now. It had gone well over $3,000 now. I then get a short message back that says, "Yeah bro, it's too much, it's already at over $3,000, I'd rather just get my $500 back. I'm sorry, the duck." I get a hold of him and basically tell him he's not getting his money back and that this is on him. He shouldn't have left the car there for days, which I warned him about before he bought the car. He proceeds to tell me, "Look, we can do this the easy way, or the hard way," to which I tell him he's not getting his money back and he needs to pay the towing company to get the car back. He immediately hangs up, and sends me a message that says, "I'll see you soon." I, a 20-year-old college student who has never dealt with anything regarding the law, is now freaking out because the new buyer basically said, "Duck you," while I'm sitting here with an ever-increasing bill of over $3,000 in my name. Then I remember something, the signed contract that 3 people signed. The revenge, so I find the contract in a folder in my closet and immediately take pictures of it, just in case I'd need them, and then call the towing company to explain everything. The guy is super nice and at first, tells me I might be completely screwed as I never sent in a title transfer to the DMV. However, once I bring up the contract, he says, "Oh, you have a signed contract from before the car was towed? That's great, you should be fine as long as you send a title transfer indicating the sale date with the contract as proof to the DMV. I found out you can do one completely online, and once I sent it in, I didn't get any more messages from the towing company. However, I did end up calling the towing company a few weeks later to make sure I was in the clear, and what he told me was glorious. So the buyer didn't pick up the car for a while, so it continued to accrue more and more in fees until it reached over $4,000. But that's not the best part. The best part was him telling me that after a certain amount of days, the car gets auctioned off if it hasn't been picked up, and the owner of the car still has to pay all of the fees for the car for storage. By the time the guy who tried screwing me $2,000 finally called to pick up his car, the towing company made sure to get all his information, name, address, etc. first, and then let him know that the car was already auctioned off, and then slapped him with around $4,500 in storage and towing fees. I couldn't be happier. Oh, and if the buyer who tried to screw me is reading this, go duck yourself. The next one is titled, "Keep Parking in Front of My Mailbox? Get a ticket to learn your lesson." Now, I'm not a petty person or someone who looks to get revenge, but if you're just in a hole who does things to get out of a rise from someone else, you deserve some good ole karma. So I live in a neighborhood with a narrow alleyway that allows for street parking on both sides. When both sides get taken up, which happens in the evenings when everyone comes home from work, the street turns into a one-way essentially. I live on a side with duplexes and the other side is townhomes. The street is relatively quiet and everyone seems super friendly, but I noticed one day when I got home around 3 o'clock that a red Acura parked in front of my mailbox. Now, I noticed on days off or on Saturdays that USPS comes around 1 to deliver mail, so I went to check my mail and didn't get any mail that day. Pretty normal to not receive mail every single day, so I shrugged it off. This happened for about 3 weeks and I noticed I was receiving significantly less mail and missed important documents, i.e. my newborn social security card, after I had to drive to USPS and pick up my son's social security card. I did some research and found that you're not allowed to park in front of a mailbox between 9 to 4 to allow for packages and mail to be delivered to the mailbox. Mail carriers who drive do not leave their vehicles and need the space to park in front to drop it off. So I wrote a polite note on her windshield saying, "Hey, this is your neighbor across the street. I was wondering if you could leave the space in front of my mailbox open between 9 to 4 so mail can be delivered, as I missed some important mail, thank you." She of course kept parking in front of my mailbox, and this went on for another month. I had to ask her next door neighbors and other people if they knew who she was and which unit she was in for. I could knock on her door and ask her in person, but her neighbors had said she was apathetic and wasn't considerate for her neighbors. So I took matters into my own hands and called the non-emergency police line and asked them what I could do. They pointed me in the right direction and I was able to print out the parking codes that our city has online that state specifically, you cannot park directly in front of a mailbox and must be parked 6 feet away in both directions. Wrote her another note asking, "Hey neighbor, I left you a note initially asking politely, but you keep parking in front of my house. I've missed a social security card for my newborn and other important mail I need. Here is the specific parking codes you are violating for our city. If you park here again and don't leave space for my mail to be dropped off, I can have your car towed." Left both the parking code and my note on her windshield and hoped that she would finally be a good neighbor and listen. So for about a month she actually listened and didn't park in front of my mailbox. Instead she decided to be petty and park in front of my house. Now I normally park in street parking, and my wife parks in our driveway, only fits one car, and I park right in front of my house. All of the neighbors normally park right in front of their house, and if they do that, there's plenty of parking to go around. I decided not be petty about this and stoop down to her level and just park in other spots or in the spot she normally parks across the street. Yesterday, October 20th, 2020, I pull up to my neighborhood and noticed she is parked in my spot again, of course, but she was extremely close to my driveway. She actually didn't leave any room to where my driveway ended and where the nose of her car was parked, and there was about 20 feet of space from the car behind her, so plenty of room to back up and leave space from my driveway. So the only way my wife can park in our driveway is to drive into our neighbor's driveway and then turn into ours. Our driveways are connected since it's a duplex. Imagine a wide driveway that fits 2 cars. My wife told me that she was doing yard work and thought I came home, so she peered around the corner from the backyard to see if it was me and saw that it was the blonde girl in the red Acura, with a friend. The blonde girl was driving the car and her friend got out to tell her how much room she had from our driveway, guiding her as close as possible without blocking it. That was definitely her last chance. I did some research as soon as I got into our house last night and saw the parking codes that state you must leave 5 feet of space between from the driveway, private driveway, etc. So I called the non-emergency number for the police and talked to a dispatcher. They dispatched an officer and I came out to speak with her. There were 2 cops and both were women, super nice, and asked a couple questions. The first one asked where she lived and I pointed right across the street. The second one asked why is she parked so close when she has 20 feet behind her? I told them about the history between us and the mailbox situation and where we were now. So they ended up writing her a ticket, said to me, if this happens again, call the non-emergency line and we will have it towed. I thanked them and wished them a good night. If you're the blonde girl reading this, be a nice, good, decent human being. Don't be a piece of trash. The last one is titled, Nepotism is Nothing to be Alarmed About. This story takes place about 2005. Back then I was working for a low-voltage electrical company that specialized in custom residential electronic systems, home theater, intercoms, distributed audio, security and fire systems, and wired networks. We did everything from installing wire in new home construction to programming the installed systems once the home was finished and training the homeowners on how to use their systems. This was before companies like Sonos and SimpliSafe were around or prolific, and before the housing market crashed, so we were a pretty busy company. Pretty neat job, learned a lot about construction and building codes, but also got to do things like hang TVs, program custom home theaters, and lots of electronics troubleshooting, which set me up very well for later occupations. The owner of the company had hired his nephew as a salesperson shortly before I started working there as an installer. A short while after I started, we had tons of work and not enough installers, so nephew was given a work van and a bag of tools and worked on job sites instead of creating bids. We, the other installers, liked nephew for the most part, but also got the sense that he saw this as a demotion and was being assigned work that was beneath him. If there were undesirable tasks to do on a job, such as crawling through a nasty attic or crawl space underneath a house to get a wire to a particular spot, or pulling a wire through an outside conduit in the rain, he would never volunteer, and would always jokingly threaten to have a talk with uncle when a site lead would assign him a task he didn't want to do. Most of us noticed this but only mildly griped about it. The real frustrations came at the end of the day, when nephew would always have an excuse to leave a job site right on quitting time. Because we were so busy, it was often the case that leaving a job which was only scheduled for that day incomplete was unacceptable, so we were all getting lots of overtime when a job would run long and need to be finished. If nephew was your work partner on a job that worked long, however, you usually got stuck staying late while he went to whatever obligation was his excuse that day. Now I understand everyone has their own personal obligations, but it was becoming the rule rather than the exception that nephew would not ever stay late on a job to help get it finished. Adding to the frustration was that if for some reason a job just could not get completed on its scheduled day and the installer or crew had to come back, thereby messing up the work schedule, everyone on said crew was sure to get a butt chewing by the production manager, everyone except for nephew, whom the manager rarely ever uttered a cross word to. In one instance in particular, nephew and I were working on a job which was only scheduled for one day that was about a 90-minute drive out of town. It was pretty apparent by late afternoon that we were not going to be able to finish that day. Nephew informed me that he had a church function to attend, and I had a school registration meeting for the apprenticeship I was part of. So we called the office to let them know we needed to return later in the week. The following Monday at our weekly team meeting, one of the managers gave a very passive-aggressive lecture to the entire team that jobs need to be done on schedule, especially when they are a long drive from town, and that staying late was expected, even if it was inconvenient for things in our personal lives. He didn't mention names, but I had a feeling he was talking about nephew and I talked with him one-on-one after the meeting to clarify that he was referring to us. He responded that he was, and that he knew about nephew having to leave for an obligation and that I had also decided to leave because I just didn't want to work late. I asked him why he thought I had left without a good reason, and he said all he knew was what nephew had told uncle over the weekend. Mother ducker. Now then, this company was based in Portland, Oregon, but we also had a lot of work in Central Oregon around Bend, which is about a 3-hour drive from Portland. Uncle owned a house in the area, and this house served both as a show home for the regional salesperson to show potential customers, but also as a place for installers from the Portland office to stay when the workload in Bend required additional hands. At our busiest, at least one person from Portland was traveling to Bend just about every week, as the company was slow to hire people that actually lived in the area. The house had 3 bedrooms and had examples of all of our most common residential systems installed. One week I was down in Bend working and I called the Portland office to give them an update on how the week's schedule was shaping up. Over the course of the conversation, I found out that nephew would be coming to Bend the following week. Once off the phone I recalled how he had recently thrown me under the bus, and that's when I remembered that the alarm systems we installed had an auto-arming option. The alarm system in this house had a motion detector which looked down the hallway attached to all 3 bedrooms. So my plan was to program the system to auto-arm every night at about 3 a.m., when I knew he would be asleep. In order to get him to walk down the hallway, the day that I headed back to Portland I set the tabletop alarm clock in the bedroom I was pretty sure he would not be sleeping into 3:15 a.m., and cranked the volume all of the way up. When the clock alarm went off, he would have to walk into the hallway to turn it off, which would set off the motion detector and the louder than Gonda's horn siren which was also in the hallway. Just to be certain he would walk down the hallway, I went ahead and set the alarm clocks in all 3 bedrooms, and spaced them out to go off at 3:15, 3:30, and 3:45 respectively. This ensured that he would have to leave his room to quiet at least one alarm, most likely 2, and the alarms would be spread out so that he would have to get out of bed multiple times. Best case scenario was that he would set his own personal alarm in his room, not touching the desktop clock, creating the possibility that there would be a total of 4 potential alarms to disturb his slumber. I was pretty sure this would work. He would expect the alarm system to be armed in the house when he arrived the first time because the previous installer would have armed it before leaving for the weekend. I just had to keep my fingers crossed that he wouldn't notice the auto-arm indicator on the alarm keypad. It was not a feature that we commonly ever set up for customers, so I was pretty confident he wouldn't notice it. The other thing I was gambling on was that the tabletop clocks would turn their alarm noises off after a certain amount of time. These were older, stupid clocks, so I could only program the time to go off, not a particular day. I know that my clock at home would turn off after a certain amount of time, so I hoped that would be the case with these, and that he wouldn't enter the house to 3 raging clocks going off, though that was also humorous to imagine. Fast forward to the following Monday morning. I'm stocking up my work van at our shop when I notice I've missed a call on my phone. It's from nephew, and he's left a voice message. A very long, very serious voice message. He was not pleased. I laughed my butt off, then hit replay. Then I let my coworkers listen, after briefly explaining what nephew had woken up to. They laughed their butts off. Then the production manager came over, saying he had just got off the phone with nephew and wanted to know why he was so upset. I told manager about the trap, and then let him listen to the voice message. He laughed his butt off. At this point, manager said to not be surprised if I got a call from uncle later that day, because nephew was legitimately upset. Apparently, he had chosen the master bedroom to sleep in, which was where the first alarm was set, so he was noisily awakened at 3:15 a.m., but turned the alarm off and went back to sleep. At 3:30, he was again awakened, stumbled into the hallway, and set off the motion detector, getting the Behazus startled out of himself by the home security siren. After getting the home alarm turned off and the bedroom alarm quieted, he called the alarm company to let them know it was a false alarm. They needed to know the address of the house, but he couldn't remember it, so he had to get dressed and walk outside to look at the front of the house. The address was not in their system. A few more minutes of confusion and he finally learned that the house was not even monitored at the time, which means that the alarm system didn't actually place a call to the station, it only set off the siren in the house when triggered. Getting off of the phone, he went and checked the 3rd bedroom. He's a quicker learner than I gave him credit for, and turned off the 3rd clock alarm before it had a chance to go off. He got a few more hours of shut-eye, and then called me first thing to let me know how not cool this prank had been. I never received an admonishing call from uncle that day. The next day, I did learn that after speaking with nephew, uncle spoke with manager, who told him how the house had been set up to trap nephew, and then played him the voicemail message which I had forwarded to manager at his request. Uncle laughed his butt off. Then he called our regional rep for the alarm systems we purchased and told him the story. by the time nephew got back to town he was able to laugh about it, though I never spent a night in the Bend house after that without checking all of the clocks first. Thanks for listening.